Well, thank you very much for staying with us. We talk the economy now and matters arising on the back of that latest Moody's downgrade as well. Where do we go from here as far as it reflects on budget 2023? Well, so far, 7 downgrades are what we have seen in 11 months, and that's a record here in Ghana with the ratings agencies. Can the 2023 budget overturn this junk status that our economy seems to have adopted? Well, joining us for that conversation, we have our guests. John Osai Kwapong is a CDD fellow. We also have Dr. Richmond Echiahene, a banking consultant. Then we're joined by Professor Charles Aka, Senior Research Fellow with ISA. We also have Dr. Joseph Obeng, President of GUTA. They'll be sharing their thoughts from the business community's perspective. But for now, though, let me come into the studio. Isaac Kofi Ajay, my right-hand man, is right here to break down the data for us. Isaac, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Ben.
Hope you're well.
Oh, yes, I'm fine. How about you?
Well, we're okay, by God's grace. So let's get down to the data. What exactly are you going to be digesting for us this morning?
Well, so you spoke about the 7 different downgrades from 3 different ratings agencies this year. And so if you look at the chart I have on the touch screen right now, it will tell you the number of downgrades we've had from these 3 different ratings agencies. It started on 14th January this year, where Fitch was the first to come into the scene with a downgrade of B-2 with a negative outlook. Then, less than a month, we had Moody's also following with a CAAA1 with a stable outlook, and then there was S&P with a CC, plus with a negative outlook on August 1st, 2022. Now, since then, we've seen reviews upon reviews as far as Ghana's downgrade is concerned. This is about our, sovereign bonds in the on the international front. So, yesterday or 2 days ago, when Moody's actually reviewed their 30th September, ratings, they actually sent our sovereign bond. They tagged it as, a CA, meaning it moved from a C AAA2 to now a CA. Now, Ben, if you look at the scale, it's from A to A AAA down to a C. And so, if you look at the scale, the last 3 ratings that you can see on the scale is actually a CAA, then we have a CA, then we have the C being the last one. So this is the last but one scale that we are on. It simply means that our bonds aren't doing well. They are actually in a deeper junk zone. And they cited the reason why they had to push our bonds to this category. They cited the government's intention to do a debt restructuring in 2023. Now, we've had a lot of conversations about whether there's going to be a haircut or there's not going to be any haircut. Government has actually come out to say that they'll do something they call debt exchange. Debt exchange, whatever it is still debt restructuring. And so Moody's actually cited this and said that they believe that the private sector will have a big loss if this debt restructuring is concerned at both the domestic and the international front. Now, just like I was walking you through the rating scale, if you have a CA, what does it simply mean? A CA simply means that, your debt levels are actually unsustainable. And you've seen that this year, or getting to the last, the last 2 months or 3 months, we've seen all these ratings agencies citing the same reason for the kind of, tag that we have on our sovereign bonds. So Moody's, and on 29, just about 2 days ago, when they gave us the CA, actually said that the announcement of debt restructuring in the 2023 budget by the finance minister was actually one of the main reasons or the key driver of they giving us this tag.
So just to take a bit of a pause there, it confirms then the things we've been told about a debt restructuring. You remember when we interacted with Deputy Finance Minister Dr. John Kumar, there was some talk about certain bonds, and then there was talk later on that no, it's not a haircut, so to speak. But if the credit rating agencies are telling us that per their readings, there is a haircut, there is debt restructuring, then it means we are in that territory now.
Absolutely. So we have all 4 of them here. First was the president on October 30th, he said he was very categorical that there wasn't going to be any haircut. He referred to this as a rumor and that we should actually move away from this.
But there was an explanation of that by Kojo Nkrumah after he had said that.
He said that my understanding is that probably there will be no principal will be affected, but principals will have a haircut in, and it says in other words, your principal may remain. However, you would have definitely lose out or suffer haircut on the interest. So he was saying that there was not going to be any haircut on your principal, or probably you have your interest on your bonds or your securities being affected. Then the finance minister came in on 24th November when he read the budget, and he said there's going to be a debt exchange program. Now, the last time a country did a debt exchange program, I think that was Jamaica. They did about, in 2010. And it's the same thing. It was debt restructuring. They just called their creditors to come and just shop for the debt that they actually owed them. And then they were giving new terms and conditions. It's either you have your interest, the time that you're supposed, the interest rate that you're supposed to get being truncated, or maybe, if you're supposed to take your principal, the duration or the maturity period was actually extended. Then we had, the deputy finance minister also giving some clarity over there. He is saying that he believes that those who are in the international front or the external will probably have about 30% cuts. And I think that this actually was the reason why, one of the reasons why Moody's actually downgraded us, because if you're going to do a debt restructuring on the international front, then you should know that probably in the next 6 months or 7, there's the likelihood of you going back to the Eurobond market to get the 3 billion that you always get to help your economy. You are really going to lose out. So they all cited debt restructuring. So it means this is a very key, a condition to an IMF program. And the IMF made it very clear that, before they will go ahead to give you any program, your debt levels must be sustainable. And in cases where a country's debt is tagged as unsustainable, that country must go ahead to do a debt restructuring before an IMF program that country will be given the go-ahead to do an IMF program. So there's a template for Ghana to follow. If you look at Zambia, they actually ran to the IMF December 2020, when they were actually the first country to default in Africa. So they went to the IMF for a program. But the IMF looked at their books and saw that their debt levels were unsustainable. So Zambia had to do a debt restructuring before they finally got the $1.3 or $1.4 billion IMF program. And
we can say for a fact that they are doing pretty well since that time.
Absolutely. If you look at the Zambian kwacha, it's one of the best performing currencies against the US dollar. Their inflation has actually moved from a double digit now to a single digit, somewhere around 9.4%.
Yeah.
And so it tells you that when IMF is in the picture, there's some sort of good.
That is, if you do the right things.
If you do the right thing.
And that is something we've been blamed for, that we should have started our own restructuring process even before the IMF came in, so that by the time they came in, we'd be able. That is the Zambian example. We have not done that.
So we've not done that. If you look at the 2019 Article 4 assessment that the IMF did, it was clear that we're at high risks. 2021, same thing was there, and we were hoping that the kind of reserve that we had then, which was about $10 billion, could take us. The whole year we could use
that turned out to be a false hope.
Because now that 10 billion reserve has now dwindled from 10 billion now to 6.7 or 6.6 billion dollars, and that can afford you just 2.9 months of imports. It's less than 3 months. And when you find yourself in this situation, definitely you need someone who will give you a loan at a cheaper rate, because you can't go back to the international market again.
Yeah, because the rates are not favorable.
They aren't telling you to come, but they are telling you that when you come, be ready to pay high interest. So if I was giving you at 8%, because you are at high default or likelihood that you default, I probably will give you the loan at 25% or 80%. And
so that in any case, even if you default, it wouldn't affect
your interest will actually crowd out, or it will actually offset the kind of loss that I will bear. And so would there be a haircut? The finance minister has also been speaking, but the condition that I spoke about, the IMF will never give you a loan if your debt levels are unsustainable. You have to go ahead to do a debt restructuring before you get the opportunity to spend any money. Remember that if IMF approves, 3 billion for us to spend, it doesn't mean that we're going to have, the entire 3 billion given to us to spend at a go. We have to meet certain conditions before 3 billion that we are hoping to get from them, we actually get it.
I mean, the disbursements are done based on need and what specifically is going to be done. When you look at the Argentinian case, for example, I think of the 40-something billion that they were meant to get, I think 42 billion. They were given 3 point something, or is it 4 point something billion initially? So that's how it goes, based on need. And but one thing I find interesting, the fact that according to Bloomberg, we're now on par with Sri Lanka. That is, I mean,
which is actually
staggering.
It's something that we can't really talk about as a country, because it's not a matter of being at the same place with Sri Lanka, but the kind of tag, the economic tag that both of us will have is what we're talking about. I mean, Sri Lanka is also just any country like Ghana, but the kind of situation they are in, we actually do not want to be.
And that sends a very wrong message to investors as well.
Absolutely.
Because they wouldn't want to risk putting their money in this economy.
Absolutely. If I'm giving you a loan and I look at you and I see that, you can't pay, there's no way I'm going to, give you that loan. Or probably I'll give it to you, but it will come with conditions that are probably very austere. So, so if there is a haircut, what's going to be the effects on investors or those who have securities with government? So we checked this. The last time government actually updated this data repository was in the 2021 debt report. And we were actually able to glean these data. So if you look at, from the domestic sector, those who are having securities with government, domestic investors have about 152.4 billion Ghana cedis with government as securities. And this is about 84% of the entire, securities that government had in 2021. The domestic sector, if you break it down, banking sector had about, 91 billion. We had the non-banking sector about 61.4 billion. And foreign investors in our domestic market also have about 28.9 billion. It was about 16%. So if you look at this, you could see that if anything should happen, the banking sector will be hit significantly, will actually take a hit significantly. So you heard the governor saying that they are actually observing the situation. And so if there's anything that will probably cause the banking sector to actually go back to the 2017 or 2018 levels, they will step in to make sure that they have the kind of liquidity that they need. But certainly, we do not want to do this and spend about additional 25 billion or 30 billion to do another banking sector restructuring or banking sector.
Definitely, we cannot afford to do that. Kofi, thank you so much for sharing those details with us, bringing us the scope on where exactly we find ourselves post that Moody's downgrade further down the ladder. But anyway, let me bring in now, as we engage our guests, Sethchum Akwabwa. He is CEO, Association of Ghana Industries. He joins us via the phone lines. Mr. Akwabwa, thank you for joining the conversation. I hope you're well, sir.
Yes, by God's grace, I'm fine.
Great. For you, the Association of Ghana Industries, let's go straight down to it. What does it mean? Some of the dynamics that we have to grapple with. We've been told that our tax handles have increased. The minority, for example, suggesting 23 of them have been added on. We know the e-levy and VAT situation. And now, in terms of our economy, our credit ratings are going plummeting fast. What does this mean for the business community? What does it mean for the AGI?
Well, thank you very much. For us, first of all, we appreciate the effort to bring stability, because we've said several times prior to the budget reading that our major issue in this budget is to see signs of stability, indicators that government is going to bring stability. And I think the effort to pursue the IMF intervention and the requirements that goes with it is to see some effort, because the key effort is to generate more revenue domestically, show up your revenue levels to be able to meet your expenditure. Otherwise, IMF intervention may even be difficult to manage. So we see that effort. But while doing so, we also appreciate one key thing that now everybody is talking about, and that is the need to concentrate on domestic production, improve industrialization to reduce importation. I think the recent experience we've had through the COVID period and even now is the depreciation of the cedi. Clearly, is part of the reason is the over excessive importation that is bedeviling us. So, mention have been made in the budget that effort will be made to concentrate on local production. So, though all those efforts are very important, and it all depends on how it is well implemented. For us as an association, we are ready to work with government to ensure that we have effective implementation of some of these policies to improve the productive sector. But having said that, I think when it comes to some of the taxes, we have a challenge with it. For example, the VAT being increased to 2.5% whilst maintaining the recent VAT regime. Recall that previously, when it was 17.5%, it was clearly input-output tax, so you recover all the VAT that you pay to government through your sale. Then last year, there was an imposition of a levy. So 6%, in fact, last year it was 5%, last year it was increased to 6%. So this 6% cannot be recovered. It meant that when you pay out 18.5% to government, you can only recover 12.5%. That additional levy didn't help manufacturing. So we thought that for this year, it's one of the inputs we made, that we were going to reverse the situation. Now we have increased the VAT without necessarily changing the VAT regime. It means that additional levy is there and we are paying more VAT when you add it. And you know, a certain portion, that levy part is also a tax on tax. So when you calculate it, in actual fact, it becomes about 21.5%. And we think this is on the higher side, and it doesn't support manufacturing. Bear in mind that most of the well-organized manufacturing companies and industrial companies are on this VAT regime. A lot of the traders who buy and sell, who import, are actually on the flat rate. So when you have increased the VAT rate without necessarily increasing the flat rate, then you have an issue because you are reducing tax for importers. So I think we have to look at it critically, especially with the talk of trying to improve local production, supporting local manufacturing, making them more competitive. You shouldn't have a tax regime that is run counter to whatever your objectives are. So I think this is one area that has to be done. We are aware that government has made an effort to reverse the benchmark value, which is good because it's something that we thought was not the right policy. And we appreciate the effort being made to revise it, which is good. However, we think that to support manufacturing, we need to look at the whole regime critically. And I'm not talking about the benchmark policy. I'm talking about the regime of supporting local manufacturing. Bear in mind that the manufacturers also import a lot. They also import raw material. And for most countries, raw material importation comes in duty-free because you don't pay the duty at the time of importation. You rather pay it after, we call it post-production tax. So we would love to see more post-production tax instead of pre-production tax. So, for example, can we look at a waiver on duties and taxes on raw materials so that it encourages local production? And then we plan in a way that we get to a state where even the raw materials that are being imported are all produced locally. We develop the value chains and we'll be able to make a good impact on the manufacturing sector. For me, the principle of going manufacturing and supporting industry is the best and it's the right time to do. If this time, I don't know how and when we're going to do it again. So there are issues in the budget that I think we need to get better, we need to work with government. A lot of gray areas also are in here, and we need to discuss it better to see how well it's going to be implemented. But I think if we're able to do it well, we can turn around the economy in the long run.
Right. So, Seth, just a quick reaction. Based on all the things that you've said, what can the business community expect in 2023? Is it going to be any better? We've heard from the Vice President saying that the economy will soon be restored. The economy will soon be buoyant again. Are you that expectant? What is the business community looking forward to in 2023? Briefly on that.
Well, I think that we expect stability. As for significant growth, we shouldn't have high expectation on that.
Okay.
But if you look at the government's own projection of growth, we are projecting to grow about 2.8% or so. So it's not a very high expected growth. And therefore, significant growth isn't really expect. But at least we should have stability. And from all indications. And it also depends very much on how well we're able to implement some of the policies and ideas that are in the budget. The challenge we have in Ghana is always the challenge of implementation. In principle, we have good policies, but implementing them becomes a challenge. But if we implement it, I think we at least have stability and have normal. And then subsequent years to the express some growth. But huge growth next year, I think we highly unrealistic.
All right. Mr. Chuma Akakpo, we are grateful that you took the time to join us this morning for a conversation. Thank you so much for your time, sir. And that is Mr. Seth Chuma Akakpo, who is with the Association of Ghana Industries. Let's now bring in Dr. Joseph Obeng of the Ghana Union of Traders Association, GUTA, as they are popularly known. Dr. Obeng, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, sir.
Thank you so much for making the time to join us this morning. We've heard of many different dynamics and the tax handles being, rearranged, so to speak, as far as the 2023 budget statement is concerned. What are your quick reflections on that? How does that factor into the exchange rate, the inflationary rate, and some of the dynamics we are now looking at? E-levy, as it is, no threshold, but reduced to 1%. VAT up by 2.5 percentage points. And now, on the credit side, we are, facing even worse in terms of the ratings agencies. What is your quick analysis of all of what is going on? What does it mean to you, the business community?
Yeah, it is very unfortunate regarding the rating agencies. It does not augur well for the nation. And that's why all of us, as citizens of this country, should come together and find any means to support government to come out of this challenge, a huge challenge that we have in. And it also means that government also have to work with all of us, listen to our inputs positively, so that we will be able to successfully come out of this mess that we find ourselves. Now, much as we want to come out of our problem, we do not necessarily have to also overburden the taxpayer. And that I also admit the fact that government is doing everything possible with regard to the tax exemption measures that they are doing to stop the tax exemption abuses and other areas. But what we have problem with is the fact that taxes are not made to ensure compliance. Our structures are, as in regard to the VAT, it does not ensure compliance at all. And that's what government needed to structure, to reform, before even thinking about any increment. Now, we have a serious problem. The tax structure is not conducive for trading activities. That's why our brothers in Kumasi embarked on that demonstration. And now, the structure itself is not being looked at. There's no uniformity with this tax system. And then we found it prudent to increase the tax rate. This is not good, even for the economy, the economics of it, because it means that people will be unable simply to comply, and for government to get its revenue. And then prices of goods are also going to go up unnecessarily. Now the benchmark discounts have been taken off. And as a matter of fact, it has been taken off a long time, and that we are not getting any advantage of any benchmark discount. And it has made prices, duty payment gone up, astronomically high, to the extent that much as we admit that we have to, am I on? Much as we are.
Yes, you're on.
that we have to encourage local production. That's why government have also fence ring some 10 products that they are going to help, and then that they are going to support and then restrict importation. We don't have any problem at all with that regard. But it also means that there are so many items that we do not produce here that we have to make sure that we are able to bring to come and service the good people of the country. Now the VAT have been increased and is going to add up to the cost of doing business. You know, the e-levy also, though it was reduced by 5%, 1% have been increased to those who were having the threshold. And so I was expecting that once the threshold is removed, we should have made it affordable, about 0.5%, where the compliance will be fully assured, and that government will also have its bit to develop the country. But the VAT is a worrying area that we will need Parliament to look at. Already, the businesses are overburdened with taxes. And so for you to increase it and also to aggravate our problem, especially when it will also add up to duty payment. When we say duty payment, we are talking about where one used to pay about 50,000 Ghana cedis for a container. Now it has moved to about 300,000. That's what we are talking about. So It's not a small increment that we are talking about. And because the benchmark is removed, okay, he said that it's removed for the development of the local industries. We will support it. We will not talk about that. But at least for the VAT, it should be looked at, and then the structure itself, the structure of the tax system should be reformed, so that there should be uniformity, and then compliance will be assured.
Okay, Dr. Obeng, at least you've shared your thoughts with us on this. We'll see, especially as the debate of the 2023 budget goes on. We'll see what happens. But with the introduction of the new tax handles that we've been told have crept in just some 30 seconds, how do you feel about that? And, for example, road tolls are back. You know, other things are being factored in. How will that affect the business community in some 20 seconds?
Yeah, expanding the tax net from any angle is what we support, because we think that we of the importing community have been overly surcharged with all these taxes. And so broadening the tax net, like the yin levy and all that, that's why we've been supporting. So that when the tax net is widened, then we can also have a respite as the importing community.
Right.
So the road tolls that have been introduced is very good, and that's why it should take care of the 2.5 VAT increment, because they said that they are going to use it to cater for the roads, and that we should modernize the road tolls. And that if you do it well, we can get everybody that we want to have to develop. We have modern ways of doing this, and that we should do it self-automated, that nobody can sit at the booth and collect the money. If you do that, then we will relieve the trading public from these excessive taxes, and then the consuming public also having some respite. And so we plead with Parliament on the VAT to take a second look so that it will bring some comfort to businesses.
Dr. Obeng, thank you so much for your time with us. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Let me now bring in banking consultant Dr. Richmond Echiahene to share your thoughts. The last time I had an interaction with you, I spoke to you about the banking sector and what all of this would mean. Now that we're looking at another downgrade when it comes to our credit ratings and everything, in the midst of all that we have to do, we've been told we don't have money to play around with. What are going to be the consequences of this downgrade, even as we, try to get a deal from the IMF? Dr. Etiahene, you will have to unmute, please. Please press the unmute button. Hello, Doc. If you can hear me, please press the unmute button, the one with the microphone, so that we can hear you. All right, let me bring in John Osai Kwapong, CDD Fellow. I'll come back to Dr. Etiahene shortly. For you, John, looking at the latest issues that we have to grapple with, economically speaking, the tax handles that have been increased or brought back, the different, levies that we're being slapped with, and our credit ratings going further down into junk status. What do you make of it all? What could it bode for us in 2023?
Well, good morning. I think for me, the clearest indication of all of these different things coming together is an indication that the road to recovery, to full recovery, will be slow, but also will be quite painful. I was looking at the macroeconomic targets for 2023, and they looked very, very, very modest, and understandably so. Growth is being projected at no more than 2.8. The inflation target is about 18 point something, roughly 19%. And even on that, when I listened to the governor from the central bank talk about the increase in the monetary policy rate, he is actually projecting that inflation would sort of start stabilizing a little bit by the end of first quarter of 2023. But even then, he was pegging it at about 25%. So you clearly see that we have quite a ways to go in terms of full economic recovery and fully turning things around to the point where the kind of pinch points that Ghanaians are feeling will begin to lessen a little bit. But and then again, at the back of a new credit rating downgrade, we are already struggling with this sort of access to the international capital markets. So at the back of another credit rating downgrade, that exacerbates the problem. Hopefully, one of the things that I've been looking forward to is to see the extent to which the actual details of whatever program we are able to strike with the IMF, and what sort of reliefs would come with that in terms of giving the government some room and some space to be able to also speed up certain things that they want to do to turn the economy around. They have a 7-pillar program under the acronym PCPG, in which they identify some key things that they believe, if it is done, would again put the country's economy on a different path, in this post-COVID recovery era. But again, the bottom line for me is that the road ahead is going to be very challenging, very difficult, very painful. But hopefully, at some point, things will turn around, because again,
at what point do you project? At what point do you think things will stabilize at? Because we've heard the Vice President say that soon our economy will bounce back. How soon, we don't know.
Right. I mean, soon is relative. If you look at the budget, and if you look at some of the projections, I think we'll have to give ourselves another maybe 2 to 3 years. Because if you look at particularly if you look at the fiscal picture for 2023 and the kind of deficit that the government is staring at, that is one area of concern. And so again, hopefully the IMF program will come in, but even if it comes in, and then when the government fully implements this post-COVID program for economic growth also kicks in, these things don't generate their intended outcomes or do not produce their intended outcomes overnight. It takes a bit of time. And so for me, ideally, I see a process of another year or two before we start feeling an ease in the pinch points that we've been experiencing.
Right. Let me bring in Dr. Etiahene. Unfortunately, we couldn't hear you earlier. Can you hear me now, Dr. Etiahene?
I can.
Great. Good to have you. I was talking about the banking sector specifically and what all of this means for you in that sector. So we have the tax handle increments. It may not directly affect you, but it affects your business. We have the inflationary rate. We know that the policy rate is going up again. That will also impact the loans that you give out to ordinary folk, including businesses. And then when it comes to our credit ratings, they are sinking even lower. What does this mean to the banking community? And what would it mean in terms of our banking sector cleanup, which we seem not to have completed as of now?
Thank you very much. And to sum it up, we're not going to have it easy, as my earlier speaker said.
Right.
It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very, very difficult because everybody is talking, but they haven't taken into consideration the debt restructuring process. That itself can affect the economy so much that we will possibly go into recession. And when you go into recession, it will take a long time for you to come up, especially from outside of the world. Everybody seems that the economy is going to turn. The speaker now has done very well. I think the nearest we can come to a point will be 2 to 3 years. Because if you look at the debt structuring that is going to come in, whether you take debt reduction, debt profile, debt rescheduling, debt swap, meaning that you're reducing the interest and extending the maturity period. All these things will affect cash flow. And the banks and business depends on cash flow. So next year, from where I'm sitting, it's not going to be easy at all, like even what happened to us in the first financial sector reform. This one, it will hit banks. It will affect their capital. And governor said recently that...
You're saying the debt restructuring will affect banks and their capital. How exactly?
Yes. Let me use one example. If we decide to do the haircut,
Dr. Etienne, please hold for me. I'm getting some feedback. I don't know whether it's Dr. Osai Kwapong or someone else. If you're not the one on now, please mute so that we don't get your feedback on. Dr. Etienne, please go ahead.
If you take the haircut, I listened to your program before 8:30. The total bonds, which the banks are, the whole industry, at September 22, was 161.1 billion, excluding 26 billion of treasury bills. And fortunately, the treasury bills are not included in parameters. So for that one, I don't have a challenge. But the banks are holding about 31% of the 161 billion. If you do the MPV, the net present value, and discount it even by even 5%, the magnitude of hitting the banks are very high. Some would have a liquidity challenge. Some are going to have problem with capital. And that is the reason why that everybody seems to be talking about these debt haircut and whatever. But what we haven't actually seen is that people are not coming with figures. People are not working with figures. Fortunately, I have worked with figures in front of me. And even if I assume even 10% of the bank's holding, if I tell you the figure, you ask me what is going to happen.
Do share. Do share. We need to know these things. Do share with us.
Yes, I use the MPV values and the 10% which the Bretton Woods institution do in doing the net present value. And I tell you, if I do 10% of the haircut, it's 33 billion. 33 billion whole bondholders' losses.
Did you say 33 million? Did you say 33 million or 33 billion? And which currency are we looking at?
I'm talking about cedis. The total bond is 160.1 billion cedis. Right. And the banks are holding close to 51 billion. If you do the net present value and you use even 10% to do it, we're going to have a challenge. That's why I'm saying that next year, the banks will not even be able, if we apply these things that we're talking about, will not even have enough liquidity unless Bank of Ghana begins to bail them out. Enough capital. That is why if you read the literature, the IMF has said critically that anytime you're doing this, be very careful about the banks, because the banks will not be able to do business as usual. If you take the debts rescheduling, where you shift the goalpost to the end by not paying cap, by not paying people's return, that one too, you're going to hold on to people's interest income. So if you defer the interest, they're not going to get interest. The interest will be part of their cash flow to help the business to work. So whichever way we're going to go next year, I'm not a prophet of a doom, but from where I'm sitting and what I have done so far, it's not going to be easy, and the economy just cannot grow just like that, because it's not, let's put it, it's not going to be easy. But however, if we all agreed, as the first speaker said, if we all agreed and begin to build consensus, where there must be a cut, we must cut it very well, so that we all come together and build it. Maybe 2 years, as he said, or 3 years, the economy will turn around. In countries where they have done it, it's taking some of them 3 years before you turn into recovery. So where I'm sitting, whether you're looking at debt restructuring, a debt haircut, whether you're looking at reprofiling or debt rescheduling, it's not going to be easy next year. Next year, 2023, will not be easy because the banks are going to suffer. Firms and institutions that have bought this money, whichever way you go around it, they're not going to get some of the capital, cash they receive.
Dr. Right, wrap on that point, and let me bring in Prof as well. It's not as what?
It's not as easy as everybody seems to be talking about. Because if you get the numbers, you see, what I like this country is that we are very narrative. We are very narrative. We talk about this, the haircut. But you see, we need to be conceptualize it and apply so that we see the magnitude of the problem.
Right.
So I'm saying that whichever way we go, reprofiling, debt reduction, debt risk scheduling, debt swap, next year is not going to be easy for the financial sector.
Let me bring in Professor Aka, who is with a senior research fellow at ESSA. Every year you come out with data, statistical data on our socioeconomic fabric, looking at everything that is happening, from the tax handles, like I mentioned. And I'm throwing the same questions to all of you. If you look at the data we have now, Ghana's Eurobonds, for example, have been among the worst performers in emerging markets globally. And when you look at Bloomberg's report, the plans for the local debt recast in September, handing investors losses of almost 12%, part of which Dr. Etiahene alluded to. These are very trying times. What do you feel would be the impact of this if a debt restructuring is done wholesale, like we're seeing it now? What would it mean for the business community, for ordinary Ghanaians in 2023?
Thank you very much, and good morning to the other panelists and your cherished listeners. I think Dr. Etiahene and other people who have spoken rightly raised the challenges that we are facing. We acknowledge that these are difficult times. To be sincere with you, we are in a difficult time. But I think when we have crises like that, it gives us an opportunity to rethink and to do things differently. So I don't want us to be unnecessarily alarmed because we have come this way before, and the history behind us can also show us that other countries have also gone through this period. But it depends on what you do, and the kind of policies we have will either aggravate the crisis or will actually give us opportunity to recover quickly and go on to the time of prosperity. Now, given the problems we have, we need to identify and properly diagnose what is the problem. And I hear people saying that government has overborrowed and our debt overhang is too much. I beg to differ. I think I disagree. Because if you look at the debt to GDP, we are talking about 75% or so. We've gone beyond that. Other countries are in 200%, 100%, and they are not troubled at all.
Yes, but they will quickly tell you that the dynamics, the economic, fiscal dynamics of those countries are very different from ours. Ours are very susceptible to certain shocks, and that's why we are where we are.
Yeah, so that's why we need to look at, so where is the problem? The problem is not the debt. The problem is how to fix the economic dynamics so that we can pay the debt. Basically, that's what it means. The problem is first the composition of the debt. The debt is external and then the domestic. The external debt, traditionally, we used to borrow whenever it was necessary. And then we borrowed from bilateral, multilateral. For some reason, over the last few years, since 2008, especially when President Kufuor went to the international bond market or the capital market, we have seemed to develop some appetite for going to the international market to borrow. That kind of market is speculative. It's what we call in economics hot money. It's like a man that leaves your wife and go to the street for prostitute. Okay, so these are people who are looking for highest return within the shortest possible time, and they are not interested in giving you money to develop your country. Okay, so that is one of the things we need to decide as we are going through this crisis. Should we come out and go back again to that market? I expect us to have policies that limit the Ministry of Finance and on going to that market unless it's necessary and unless they are borrowing for economic projects that will repay itself. That is dangerous. That's what sent Sri Lanka onto their knees. That's what sent the East Asian countries in the 1990s on their knees, because there will be quick capital reversal. If not that, our debt to GDP is not a problem, but it's because these people now began to withdraw their currencies. We now lost our reserves and we don't have the capacity to repay. So that is one of the issues which we need to address. How do we raise enough export revenue? Export is what we need to be able to pay our foreign debt. So how do we invest in our industries, in our agriculture sector, to be able to reduce our import bill and save some dollars and export the things we produce here and get more revenue so that we can pay our debt? Now look at how much we gain in export in this last 1 year, between January and September. We made exports on our trade account surplus about $1.7 billion. What the IMF is going to give us in total is $3 billion over 3 years or so. Next year, we expect that IMF will allocate about $1.4 billion to us, according to the Ministry of Finance. Now, we could get that from export if we decided even not to go to IMF and we wanted to ramp up our exports. In 1 year, we could have a surplus on our trade worth about $3 billion, and then that can finance, raise our reserves and finance our debt. But since we decided to go to IMF, what do we need to do? This budget needs to have policies that invest in the industrial sector, agro industries, to be able to make sure that the things we are importing, we reduce it and able to export more so that we can have more surplus on the trade account to finance this debts that will be due soon. Now, the other one has to do with the domestic debt. And the domestic debt shouldn't have been a problem if the interest rate was not going up. When the government was borrowing the domestic debt, most of it at the time, the interest rate was around 12.5%, thereabout, the policy rate. Now that it has been hiked to about 27%, it has increased the bill of government. And that's also another area that we need to look at. How do we have a discussion with the central bank so that the continuous increasing of the interest rate that is making the government bonds, domestic bonds, also expensive, and its services becoming expensive, and that's why this haircut is coming in. That's also a discussion we need to have, how our policy rate will not make domestic borrowing more expensive. But be that is made, I don't think that we need even this haircut at all. I think it's an injustice to perpetrate on the banking sector.
You say we don't need a haircut at all. It's an injustice to perpetrate on the banking sector. But other economists will also tell you we don't really have an option. Our hands are tied. I have, had interactions with economists in the past who have said that, like it or not, we'll have to go down this path. Is it a path we can avoid?
Well, I think we can avoid it. And this is my proposal. All over the world, throughout history, the central bank of the nation is a lender of last resort. Whenever there are crises, we don't need to wait till the economy totally contracts and for banks to collapse before the central bank comes in with a bailout.
Right.
The central bank should have enough resources or capacity to create money to save an economy that is going the way of Sri Lanka. We don't want to see political crisis, or we don't want to see this economy on fire or totally destroyed. Then we now want to do something about it. I want you to go through history in other countries. Even when US was fighting war or Britain was fighting war, the central bank is the one that came in with money to buy ammunition and to be able to fight the war. First World War, Second World War, whether it's the Japanese or it's the Europeans or any wars that were fought in history, it was the central bank was called upon to be the lender of last resort. So in this case, for example, if you look at the central bank and their balance sheet, they already have helped a lot. They are actually holding almost about 20% of the government debt. But I'm saying that they can do more. So what I think we can do, for example, if you talk what Dr. Atuahene is saying, for example, that if the banking sector is going to lose about 33 billion if there's a 10% haircut, what I would suggest is that there should not be haircut. There should actually be a debt swap. The central bank must come in to bail out the banks and to swap this debt and pay to the banking sector and assume this debt on their balance sheet. And in that case, there's no haircut. The government will now be owing the central bank more than probably they used to owe, and they will not be owing any commercial bank. And the central bank now can decide to have a reschedule and give the government 20 years to repay, or decide that it will write it off its books.
Okay, so
that is a way to save the situation in my humble view.
Okay, so no haircut. Let me take your concluding comments, gentlemen, and I want you to conclude on. We heard Prof. Aka talk about best practices we could employ. Look at Zambia, for example, and what they have done with their own program. They started their debt restructuring. We are not even into it yet. They started even before getting an IMF deal, and now they are doing well. When you look at inflation, when you look at the exchange rate and all of that. Is that the best practice and one of the examples we should follow? What should we be doing moving into 2023? I'll start with you, Dr. Akakpo. So I'm giving each one of you just about 1 minute and 20 seconds for your concluding thoughts. Dr. Akakpo.
Well, in terms of what we should be doing, as I read the budget, the post-COVID program for economic growth and those 7 pillars, I think it's a very good framework and a good starting point for the government. I think I like the part that talks about aggressive revenue mobilization. I like the part about the restructuring of particularly the state-owned enterprises and trying to ensure viability where it's a drag on the government. What are they going to do about some of those SOEs? So the framework provides for me a good guiding path for the government. I'm looking forward to how they will actually operationalize those seven key pillars and how it gets us out of the challenges that we currently face. I know revenue mobilization is very important, and I know that the government has also hinted at rationalizing expenditure and all of that. I think that would be somewhat also painful to do, but I don't think that you can only rely on just the revenue equation of a budget to put you on the path of fiscal stability. you also have to look at your expenditure. And at some point, you may have to do a bit of some deep cutting in those expenditure areas. But when all is said and done, I think that the PCPEG framework that the government has come up with in the budget, and hopefully whatever deal we strike with the IMF will be good to put us on a path of recovery.
Well, let's see how that goes. It's an enterprise we're all involved in. Dr. Kwapong, thank you so much for joining the conversation. Dr. John Osai Kwapong is a CDD fellow. Let me come to Dr. Etuahene on this bit as well. What would be your concluding thoughts in terms of the way forward for us? Which examples do we follow?
I think if I heard Dr. Aka.
Professor Aka, right.
Yeah, he made a very good point about the central bank buying it, but it depends upon the resources they have. Unlike the Bank of England, which recently stepped in to buy government bonds. If your resources are limited, the ideal situation, as I've said and I know before, if they have a lot of resources, that could have been one of the best things that could have happened to the country. But don't forget, they don't also have this type of resources to look at the debt. So, but if they have it, then the question is that you do that and all these hulu balu will stop. But what I also want to comment or talk about is that I think it has taken us too long a time to talk about domestication. And I'm very glad for the first time that the government is taking it so serious that rice importation costing us 1.5 billion. If we have put measures from 2016 to now, we would have reduced it to the barest minimum. So I think, although it may be tough, but I think it is the step in the right direction. And nobody, I believe, agriculture and agribusinesses should be supported to turn this country around. Other than that, a time will come, we will even import everything and the city will be nowhere. So for me, the one thing that I want to commend them is realizing the domestication and now trying to implement it. And they must do it forthright. Support the agri sector. Find funds. Look at the value chain system of agri. If it's maize, if it's rice, if it's whatever, let us do it. Burkina Faso has done tomatoes. As I'm speaking to you now, they are setting a factory that will process tomatoes for France. Why can't we do it? And I believe this is the step in the right direction. And the government must go all out. Whoever comes or whoever takes over must make sure that agri is a survivor. Not even the minerals. The minerals are just depleting the resources. But agri, we have a competitive and comparative advantage. Let us we all get involved. And I believe we'll be able to turn it. History has proved it. Maybe you may not be born that time. When I was in secondary school, a man of no degree, Colonel Achampo, in 74, brought this idea. And that year, Ghana made a lot of gains on agri. Now we have various PhDs, various economics, various people, but we are not improving the value chain in agri. So for me, I take my hat off, but let them not rest on their oars, because that is going to be the survival of this country in the next 10, 20 years. That is what I will say for the time being.
Since you've spoken copiously about agriculture, I'd just like to find out from you, how do you feel Planting for Food and Jobs and 1D, 1F have fared? Now we're saying that we must look at import substitution. We're banning forex to some particular imports and all of that. How do you feel those two have fared in bettering our economy? Because when you look at the data, we're still importing so much. These two, Planting for Food and Jobs and 1D, 1F, seem not to be impacting that sphere. What is your take?
I wouldn't like to comment on that, but I believe they should go back to their champions policy and read it. You see, we have competitive and comparative advantage. And let us take advantage of it. We shouldn't spread our wings doing everything. No, we're not going to succeed. Rice is taking 1.5 billion. Not quite long ago, we have to import maize for the poultry farm. Why do we have to do that? Identify rice, look at the rice people, create the enabling environment, give the value chain system, including machines, seedlings, warehousing, financing. I bet you, Nigerians have done it for rice, and Ghana can do it. I wouldn't like to comment on what other people have done, because if you want to comment, then you become an enemy of the system. But I will say, let us look at our capabilities and strength. Rice, maize, we can support the poultry farm. Unfortunately, we import about 500 million worth of poultry into this country. Can't we produce it? Ivorians do it. Why can't we do it? So for me, I won't comment on it, but let us adopt what Achampon did and study it very well, and then modify it so that we will not seem to be going here and there as if we want to do all things. But if you do all things, if you want to try to do all things, you will not be able to make impact. Let us identify few: rice, maize.
Doc,
and even preservation of plantain and yam. I would have thought by this time, Ghana would have been able to have a preservation of the currently plantains all over the place. But as we go into January, you try and see, you see the price. At least let us, our scientists, give them encouragement and let them do that. Farmers will go in and do it. People go to cocoa farm. My father was a cocoa farmer. He went in because he had a secured price. All the time there's a secure price, a secure market. So for me, that is what I will talk about just a little.
I just wanted, you said something that got me curious. Are you saying that even for you technical people, when you speak, there's some muzzling that when you pass certain comments, the system comes after you? Is that what you're suggesting? For which reason you don't want to comment on certain things?
It is true. The system has been coming after me. But you see, it is God who has strengthened me. And I will speak the truth until the day I put my hands on my chest and go to grave. I will not be afraid of anybody because it is God that has given me this type of knowledge. And I wouldn't like anybody, they have been intimidated. Let me tell you. But for me, I will continue to do what I do.
You've been intimidated by whom?
I won't like to disclose. Those who are doing it know it. As I'm speaking to you today, let me assure you, people have been paid to listen to me, whether I'll make comment against certain people. As I'm speaking to you, yesterday, the discussions we have about the policy rate and what, I got all the calls from all the place. But you see, we are a Ghanaian. I am a Ghanaian, born, fully fledged Ghanaian. If the economy is good, I enjoy the benefit, especially when I'm a pensioner. When inflation is eating my little pension, and I talk about inflation and currency depreciation, they said you are the enemy of this. I can't keep quiet. No. I will speak. Let them think about me. Let them think and plan about me. And the God who is in me will sustain me, and victory will be mine.
Doc, we're grateful that you took the time to join us this morning. It's been refreshing, and we pray that all of these people, at least they will follow the logic in what you're saying rather than anything else. We're grateful, Doc, for your time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Let me now come to Professor Aka. And before I take your concluding comments, I just want to find out from you. You made mention of the fact that we had been here before as a country. I just want you to go back a bit and explain to us when we had been here before. Because if you look at the Fourth Republic, for example, if you look at our exchange rate, we've never got here before. If you look at our debt burden, we've never hit, you know, this tune of debt before. We're looking at around 450 billion from what the finance minister told us the last time, about 330 billion added on within the last 6 years, within this administration. You look at the inflationary rate, 40.4% and the rest. So do explain to me, before we get to your concluding comments, how and when did we ever get here?
Well, if you go to our history, most recent one is to find out how was Buzia overthrown as the Prime Minister of Ghana. And you will know that it was the same debt, external borrowing, that had consumed the whole nation. We had a very serious debt overhang. And when Buzia's government came in, we went all over the world trying to look for a bailout. It's the IMF that came. IMF, the same IMF, was proposing to Buzia to implement austerity measures, some kind of, the kind of things we are seeing, high taxes, stopping government spending, recruitment, employment, and prison a freeze on wages here and there. And there was demonstration all over the place. That's what eventually pushed Buzia away. We've had this kind of histories before. The most recent one was the Doomsor. When we had the Doomsor for 5 years, we almost did nothing about it. We seem to think that we can allow crisis to go away by itself. The Doomsor, I published a paper, and the Doomsor, each year that we had Doomsor, Ghana was losing about 3 billion. So over the period, we were losing about 686 million US dollars. Over the 4-5 years that we had Doomsor, we lost a lot of money that was enough to have built a new refinery. So if our problem was
a new refinery of what? Oil?
Yes, a total oil refinery. We could have built Tor all over again afresh. And since we have oil, for example, even now that we are discussing, one of our biggest problem is the importation of oil, crude, and then processed refined petroleum products. And if you ask that government should invest in Tor, they will say there's no money. And some economists and some politicians will say, no, government should cut down on its expenditure. But if I was to advise government, I would have asked government to make sure that just like we are talking, every oil, crude that we are producing here must not leave the shores of Ghana. It must be processed here. And if it will require government, if we cannot have a private sector to invest in an oil refinery, it is nothing wrong for the government himself to build a refinery, to support a refinery here where we can produce our processed petroleum products here. And if you add that to the Ghana gas, we would have solved one of our biggest problems where we lose a lot of dollars because of that. But there are people who think that, well, government, leave it for the market, government doesn't have money, and it should not go into, like Dr. Tiahin was saying, the central bank can never run out of money. There's no central bank in the world that doesn't have money. The central bank can only run out of external reserves because we don't produce dollars. So we can run out of our reserves. But no central bank can run out of its local currency as a sovereign central bank. It's an ideological decision. It's a political decision. It's something that we decide that we don't want central bank to print money. If that's what we have decided, no problem. But otherwise, there's no central bank that can run out of its own local currency. And if it's going to use that local currency to do an economic project, to invest in a Tor or in agriculture, I don't see what is the problem about it. I don't see how it causes inflation. One of the things that is causing inflation here is because of food. Food prices are going up and we are importing a lot of food. So if the central bank could support agriculture industrialization to produce the food we eat here, how should that cause inflation? It should rather bring inflation down because the prices are going to go down. So we have had these ideological, philosophical discussions about the role of the central bank and the issue about creating money and printing money. But it's not as if central bank is powerless and can run out of its own resources. It doesn't have. But I think I want to support, as I conclude, what Dr. Tiahene was saying. And I want us to honestly face this problem. There is no way Ghana is going to prosper or develop to become a high-income country if we neglect agriculture. It's because we neglected agriculture for all these years. That's where we are now. That services seems to be the one driving the economy, and services does not develop a country. It does not create the necessary jobs and the feedback and to be able to raise the productivity in the other sectors. So every country, Britain, US, Japan, Malaysia, South Korea, every country that has developed to become a rich country, they first, as of first importance, focus on agriculture. And it had all the state resources, all the state financing, all the state research and technology development was backing agriculture. And when agriculture developed and modernized, then labor was released onto manufacturing, and then the service sector also picked up. We have failed to do that. Agriculture, we still have hoe and cutlasses, we still have lack of irrigation, lack of modernized technology and other things. You can get to, I was driving last week, I got to Akumada. Just like Dr. Chahin was saying, Burkina Faso has invested in tomatoes. Almost every household in Akumada is a tomato household, growing household. A lot of tomatoes are there. Very cheap, but there's almost no government support. There's almost no industry to help process it into tomato paste. And the prices, by the time it gets to Accra, you cannot buy it. Onions now, we are importing them from Burkina and Niger. All of those kind of things. So I think that since tomorrow is a Farmers' Day, I think we need to invest in agriculture. But when I look at the budget, the amount of money being located to agriculture, about 2 billion Ghana cedi, is woefully inadequate. We need, by my own estimations, to spend at least 7 to 10% of our GDP on agriculture annually for the next 5 years if you are going to break forth into prosperity. And that 7 to 10%, you are talking about 40 to 50 billion Ghana cedi must be invested. Government must look for that resources to spend about 40 to 50 billion Ghana cedi each year in the agriculture sector alone for the next 3 to 5 years, and everything will change. There will be enough food, farmers will become rich, there will be a lot of savings, and there will be a lot of productivity, and then it will raise the other sector, which will be the manufacturing, agro-based industrialization, and that will lead to our prosperity. If we still keep 1 billion, 2 billion into agriculture, planning for food and jobs, very good philosophy, but there's no financing that is actually being put there, 2 billion, it's not going to do the trick, and it's not going to do the magic. And I think that if we take agri seriously, we are going to see that everything is going to change. If we fail to invest in agriculture and agriculture stagnates, the whole economy will stagnate.
Just a quick follow-up on the bit about agriculture. I don't know whether it's not adding up or whether we are not seeing something, because people have complained about the prices of products. But if you listen to the Agric Minister, for example, who recently said that the agricultural sector grew by 4.7% in 2019, then it went up to 7.4% in 2020, and now when we look at 2021, it rose even further to 8.4%. We seem incrementally to be doing well, but is that reflective of what we are seeing in terms of the prices of foodstuffs, the prices of products on the market, or accessibility? Where are we getting it wrong, do you think?
Yeah, so I think if agri sector has been growing, but sometimes you have to look at the sources of the growth and the level at which we are growing. So if you have 1 cedi and you grow by even 100%, it becomes 2 cedi. Okay, so it's quite low that it needs to grow massively above 8-10% for us to have significant impact. But also the growth is mainly sometimes driven by cocoa sector single-handedly. Okay, so the cocoa sector is not the key. It's not the agri sector we are talking about. We are talking mainly about food production, crops, and that one is not really doing massively well. But also the other problem is that, Dr. Tiahine said it, because we have not linked the agriculture sector to processing, preservation, and to the market. So you see that sometimes the growth is in the rural sector, and then it's seasonal. So it doesn't propagate throughout the whole economy, and it's not even throughout the whole year. So it's not something that is sustainable. So what we need to do is to invest in the rural economy, which will require infrastructure. It requires science and technology, research. It requires financing, and it requires a link to the market to make sure that there's a market for the goods that are produced, so that when they produce it, it doesn't become a glut and then they sell it cheaply and then everything gets rotten and then they go back to poverty. So there's a whole, I think, comprehensive planning that we need to look at. And I think he talked about looking at Champon's policy, by looking at some of the policies the other countries. I would recommend one country for you, for example. You can go to Malaysia. Malaysia picked oil palm and rubber. We have rubber here. If you go to the western region, from Agunam Kwanta all the way to my village in Nzema, people plant rubber. We have oil palm and we have coconut. What have we done with it? Malaysia is now the largest exporter of palm oil throughout the whole world. And they have built industries to use palm oil and the whole produce from the oil palm to produce soap and manufacturing and other things that are needed. We have not done that. So we have not, even if you have oil palm here, when you produce it, what are you doing with it? We are still importing oil into this country, including even palm oil. So those are the kind of things we need to do and link the agri to the market and to the industry and to processing so that there will be value addition. And then we can even export now with the AFTA, we can export to the sub-region and even export some of them abroad.
Prof, we're very grateful that you joined us for this conversation. Professor Aka is with ISA, and he also joined the conversation. So we had at different times joining the conversation, we had Dr. John Osai-Kwapong, a CDD fellow. We also had Dr. Etuahene, Dr. Richmond Etuahene, a banking consultant. We also had Professor Charles Aka, whom you just heard, senior research fellow at ISA. And at a point, we had Dr. Joseph Obeng, president of GUTA, together with Seth Chum Akabwa, CEO of the Association of Ghana Industries. That is how we wrap this end of the conversation. But we have a lot more coming your way. Bernice Abubeidu Lanza is out and about. We have a lot to talk about on the back of the latest dynamics from the telcos. Stay with us. We'll be right back.